Elon, Chamath support GameStock at a crazy time. And that's our story today, is the GameStock conundrum continues. This is Greg for Teslafaninsight. Thanks once again for joining us. If this is your first time, welcome. If you're a repeat visitor, welcome back. Wow. Today, I want to thank our Patreon supporters. Your support allows us to exist and be viable as a channel. It's greatly appreciated. So there's a concept called cognitive dissonance. It means you see something, and because you don't believe it, you're like, that really doesn't exist. And this is what's going on for me with GameStock right now for a whole bunch of reasons. I've got a number of well-informed viewers that are part of the stock ownership, and I wanted to review what's going on there. I also wanted to review sort of strategies and techniques on how people make money on Wall Street that one should be mindful of as you're in the process of trying to trade, invest alongside them in this situation. I also was fascinated by what's going on with Chamath and Elon in this situation as well. So we look forward to sort of digging through these different layers of what's going on. So the first thing I wanted to review is there's this situation. So let's say you have a company, and that company has a little bit of a problem, which is it sits in malls, many of which are closed, or for the ones that are open, a lot of people aren't going in because they fear getting a disease while they go there. So what this then means is that this company, this is GameStop, is in a tough position because they can't pay their rent because they're not getting enough revenue in. So the natural process for the company is to go into bankruptcy, figure out which locations do and don't work. The bankruptcy allows them to exit their leases and therefore cut their overall costs. So that's sort of the natural progression of how the bankruptcy process kind of works. I mean, they could liquidate completely. There's a bunch of other ways it could happen, but I think this is basically what's going to occur here. So I bring this up because in the scenario we're watching right now with GameStop, the challenge is, if you even break it down to an individual and say, hey, as an individual, I lost my job, right? Which is the same thing as losing all your customers. And now I have to pay my rent. So you can get that deferred for a while. But the problem is eventually the landlord will kick you out, and you're not going to be in that apartment or wherever you live anymore because you didn't pay your rent. So I'm kind of intrigued by this situation because there's a lot of different angles of what's going on. So we're a thinking channel. So one item that I wanted to ask you all to do some research on is there's a company called Long-Term Capital Management. Now, what you're going to see is I'm going to go through a 4-minute discussion of who they are, what happened, et cetera. But I definitely want you to read about it. The Wall Street Journal had at least 100 different articles about it, if not 200, over a certain period of time. There was a giant hedge fund called Long-Term Capital Management. They had some of the smartest people in the world working there. And they put on so many positions that their demise potentially wiped out the entire financial system. So it's an important lesson in terms of how Wall Street operates and things that can occur. So I bring up long-term capital management because right now hedge funds get 10-to-1 leverage. So in theory, if you got $1 billion, you can do $10 billion worth of action in the marketplace. So the problem is, what if you have 10 people or 10 firms, maybe 20 of them doing this? Now you've got, call it $200 billion out there of money in action that people are trying to make money off of. And there's a potential that if they lose all their money, the whole market is jeopardized because they can't afford to pay back their 10-to-1 leverage. Or if they are paying back their 10-to-1 leverage, they sell off a lot of great companies whose stock prices take a hit, not because of bad news or they're not doing well, but just because those guys need the cash to make sure they can keep their firms open versus going straight out of business. So I believe that this is what's been happening recently, as we've discussed, with the market dipping here. Now, the next part of the show is I want you to look at your hand, like the back of your hand. So if you or I took a knife and cut the back of your hand, you run into a little problem. And the problem is that if you don't use alcohol to clear that wound, you end up with a problem, which is this bacteria sitting on your skin that once it gets in that wound, can now cause you infections and all these other problems and all these health issues. And so this is a little bit like what's going on here, where all of a sudden there can be action going, stock prices moving. But guess what? It turns out that when your skin wasn't penetrated, those bacteria had no impact and you were in great shape. The problem that pops up, though, is that as soon as you end up with a cut, the same bacteria, which is no big deal on topical skin, become a huge problem, which is what I mean by the potential of all these hedge funds, everything working a certain way on bankruptcy of a company like AMC or GameStop. But all of a sudden, there's this wound like is being created by what's going on with GameStop. So I wanted to ask you to look at long-term capital. And the reason is that there's something of a blood sport. What happens is a lot of people think about the hedge funds, doing things to small investors, to companies, et cetera. One of the many ways that hedge funds can work is to actually watch from their regulatory filings what other funds are holding. Once they understand what they are, if there's any way that they can, for example, blow the covenants of that company, they could make a ton of money inflicting pain on these funds based on knowing what's in their portfolio. And also their covenant rules can also be helpful too in terms of the destruction of those firms. So this GameStop thing is so multifaceted, and one of them that's interesting to me is just the fact that when you look at the people who've made a lot of money here, like the guy who put up 50 grand and he's got whatever, 20, 30, $40 million, a lot of these folks are actually ex-Wall Streeters who were actually at big firms and putting on trades exactly like this, but with house money. Now they're playing with their own money, smaller number, but they want to leverage that up. And I just think this guy did a great job of setting it up on the internet so that you have retail consumers in their minds, they're thinking about, hey, this is a great situation, I should get in on it. And he pumped it took him 2 or 3 years to get the web to sort of roll into his corner of thinking, and he's made a ton of money off it, which is actually really good. The issue, though, is if we go back to long-term capital, you have this thing where right now there's been a cut on the hand of investors. And that cut could go a couple of different, a whole bunch of different ways. One way for it to go is, we can easily close that out through these processes. Another way for it to go is that all of a sudden the wound wasn't addressed and it becomes infected and it creates all these other problems. So we kind of don't know what's going to happen, but we will find out. So I was kind of stunned this morning because a friend of the show, who's a Patreon supporter, sent me a clip from CNBC on a guy named Chamath. And he said something that I cannot believe, which is he said, when you look at what's going on with GameStop, it's very similar to the fact that a lot of people didn't have the vision to invest in Tesla in the early days and are still somewhat skeptical. And that kind of shocked me that he linked what's going on right now with GameStop to what's going on with Tesla. And I was kind of like, whoa. And the reason I was in that mode is that Tesla is an operating company with real customers and real growth and a large list of products that a bunch of customers are trying to get a hold of all stripes, and they can't for battery reasons, et cetera, et cetera. In the case of GameStop, the challenge is in theory, right? The challenge and the reason they have to go to bankruptcy is that they have a problem right now. If you let them operate as they are with their current burn rate, there will be no company in a year from now. Now, On the other hand, there are all kinds of things that can happen. For example, if the stock price is held up where it is and they're able to issue shares, that would actually give them stock-based cash they can use to continue to pay employees, pay rents, et cetera. So there are scenarios which GameStop could actually make this work. So I'm not a naysayer or a disliker of the company. I think it's a good company. The problem, though, is there's been a change in the business model, and that affects their ability to stay in business and prosper. So where I'm really confused and stunned is Chamath said he bought some calls into February, put up 150 grand, made $350,000, and decided that all the profits he would donate to a charity. So there's a strange question I want to ask Chamath, which is, wait a second, dude, if you put up that money and you sold out and profitably, that's good. The question, though, is why did you sell out if you think the story is so terrific? And so that question is unanswered, but I think he's very clear on the fact that this sucker is a dead duck that's going to drop into nothing. And so I kind of bring this up to you because the same thing with Elon Musk. Elon tweeted about GameStop, but Elon ain't putting no money up. So let's look at Elon. The deal with Elon is that he hates shorts, and the more money they can lose, the happier he is, especially because shorts are powerful enough they can actually help take a company out of business, which they almost did with Tesla. So in the case of Elon, any opportunity he gets to help shorts lose more money, the happier he is, because potentially it jeopardizes that business model and those guys will stop doing that. But that's a low chance to no chance that it'll happen. But I just thought that was interesting that Elon would bang out a tweet, cause $5 billion to be added to the market cap of GameStop in the process, because a whole bunch of his followers are now wanting to get in on the game and try to make some money. So basically, you know, what I don't understand about this whole thing is GameStop's situation is it's hard to make money when all of your, when your stores are closed, but all the expenses related to them being open, you still have employees, rent, you know, go through G&A, all the accounting level numbers are still in play. So I kind of bring this up today because I was kind of shocked at another level, which is one of my Patreon supporters, a long time, made a comment on our last show about GameStop, and he was like, oh, well, I'm in the Reddit group, and we're committed to hanging on to the shares. Well, that is great that retail investors can get together. It's great that they can unify and make a move. It's great that they've done their own research. All of that is terrific. The problem you have is take a look at the burn rate of GameStop. Like, how much money are they spending monthly to stay in business, right? And there's a certain clock time to how long they can maintain what they're doing before they literally run out of cash and just have to close the doors. So my attitude approach to this is not to be a naysayer and say this is bad. I'm just saying, hey, you guys can buy and hold the stock and be fervent in your conviction, and that's good. But unless those GameStop can issue shares or gets bought out by somebody or gets a rich uncle to support them, you can just watch the decline in cash that they have for the fact that their operations aren't working normally. And then you have the internet back end chewing at them as people move online to get the same services that those guys were performing. So as a result of all this, I have to say that I'm really confused because you have some really rich people like Chamath, a billionaire, who's going in and out on trades and then encouraging other people to stay in on trades that he's not in on anymore. You have people like Elon tweeting, trying to support GameStop from a tweet standpoint, but ain't none of his money up in there. So I'm kind of confused on this whole thing because without an infusion of capital, GameStop is done. And Can they get that infusion before the stock price drops so that the stock price would stay up? I think it's entirely possible. So if all those Redditors decided to stay in and the company was able to get a financing done at this valuation, they could pick up the kind of cash necessary to hang around and exist for another 2 or 3 years. And everybody would be happy. The issue, though, is the way they're going to do that is either issue debt or issue more shares, which would dilute the value of everything that's already out there. So the answer to this is going to be found out over the next few weeks. But it's awesome to see all the players swirling around this issue and how much money is flowing back and forth. So my suggestion on this whole thing is that there are going to be some interesting twists and turns. There's going to be a lot of money made and lost. At the end of the day, though, without infusion of capital from rich individual issuing some debt or something of that sort by the company at this high valuation, they can want to win as much as they want, but there's something called you just don't have any more cash to work with. So how is this going to work out in my mind? Unfortunately, I think what's going to happen is what I talked with you about, which is the prisoner's dilemma. As the stock price starts falling, it's only one click away from everybody being out. And all the people that promised that they would be faithful have a hard time because they have to explain to their families how and why they lost all that money. So I just think that where we're headed is into the zone of this thing crashes down hard. And it's not a question of if, it's when, if they cannot get a financing done. Now, if those Redditors hang on to their shares as the company issues shares to give itself more rope, totally different ballgame. I haven't seen that come from them yet. And I don't know if they announce an issuance of shares, if that might not prompt people to say, I'm getting diluted, I got to get out of here now. So stay tuned. In general, what the rules say is that companies in that situation, it's in their best interest to simply do as I described, go bankrupt. Now they can get rid of leases that are not working in the malls, and now they can trim down to locations that might be working and try to make a go of it as a smaller entity. And they get rid of a lot of liabilities, et cetera. So will they do that? We don't know. Stay tuned. The problem, though, is if they go bankrupt, all those faithful shareholders actually lose all their money because the common stock usually goes to zero in value in a bankruptcy proceeding. So we shall see how this all shakes out, and I'm rooting for our viewers, et cetera, to do well with it. But I have to say that, after I saw Chamath make comments about this is exactly like Tesla, et cetera, it feels to me like there might be a situation going on where you have Wall Street insiders identifying mouthpieces to articulate, helping to set up the uninformed to actually lose a lot of money. So what am I hoping for? I actually hope the company stays in business, gets the money it needs, and sticks around until COVID goes by, and then now they can get back to normal operations and successfully move back into action as a regular company. I kind of feel like that's not going to happen, and the reason is, number one, their users, consumers, are getting used to a new business model of doing things online, et cetera, and so that's been the nightmare for a whole bunch of companies as many businesses move on to the web. The other part of this that I see happening is that it's a possibility they run out of cash and just shut the whole thing down. I kind of feel like that's probably a low likelihood because it's a different thing for the stock to have been at 20 versus 0, but the trend was clear in terms of them systematically run out of cash. So I wanted to note that there's a famous poker term that says, if you're looking for the sucker at the table and you can't find him, then you might be that sucker. So I mention that because there's religious fervor here that I'm hearing, and that's good to be committed. But the challenge is that, if you can't pay your rent, what do? And you ain't got no cash to do it. So we'll see what happens. But best of luck for those of you that are in it. Hopefully you can get out before losing everything. And hopefully you made a few dollars. Our health tips for today, as usual, are don't forget your 25 leg lifts a day. Also wanted to encourage you to consider 3-5 or other fasting diet as a mental and physical health consideration. Also want to encourage you to think about the fact that prior to lovemaking, a small salad is a good idea because blood flow will be maintained to appropriate areas at the right time versus having to digest food. Also wanted to encourage you to not go to bed within 4 hours of eating. Best case, minimum 2 hours. Allow the food to digest a bit because you won't get cancer in the upper respiratory area or acid reflux and other issues related. Also wanted to encourage you to think about trying to maintain sleep schedules for a couple of weeks at the same wake and sleep, because you'll get into what's called a circadian rhythm. And then I ran into a friend recently who has sleep apnea, and I also wanted to encourage you to consider getting one of the apps that are free on your phone so you can monitor your sleeping overnight to identify if you might not have some issues where you're just thinking it's snoring, but the reality is you have sleep apnea, which is potentially deadly. At any rate, this is Greg for Teslafaninsight. Thanks once again for joining us. Tschüss, German, au revoir, French, Lihitrot, Hebrew, Choda, Hafez, Farsi, Zdravstvuyte, Russian, Ni hao, Ma, Chinese, Namaste, Hindi, Hey Do, Swedish, G'day, Australia, and in Jamaica we say enough respect, walk, good man. Thanks for joining us. We look forward to your constructive comments on all this. Have a great day, and bye for now.